I stood trembling on my Charleston porch, the old wooden boards creaking under my feet, as my neighbors told me I was too old to live in my own home. At 65, I clutched the railing, the paint chipped and peeling, staring at faces I'd known for decades, faces now twisted with judgment. The scent of blooming azaleas hung heavy in the humid air, but it couldn't mask the sting of their words. That very afternoon, in a moment that still feels like a dream, I dug up a rusted chest in my backyard, filled with Civil War treasures worth millions. My heart raced, not just from the find, but from the betrayal that had pushed me to that moment. Before I dive deeper, tell me, where are you tuning in from? If this story grabs you, hit that subscribe button. We've got something extra special coming tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it. My name is Eleanor Grayson, and that Charleston porch was part of the home my family has owned for 150 years. It's a Victorian beauty, with stained glass windows that catch the morning light and a faint smell of aged wood and lavender from my grandmother's sachets. I'm a retired history teacher, widowed 5 years now, with silver hair I tie back loosely and a wardrobe of beige sweaters and sensible shoes. My days are quiet, tending my garden, reading about Charleston's past, or sipping tea in my creaky rocking chair, but that quiet shattered the day my neighbors turned against me. It started subtly, whispers at the market, sideways glances as I watered my roses. The historic district of Charleston, with its cobblestone streets and whitewashed homes, was changing. Developers wanted modern condos, and my house, my stubborn, beautiful house, stood in their way. Palmetto Properties, a slick real estate firm, had been circling like vultures. Their glossy flyers, stuffed in my mailbox, promised progress and community renewal. But I wasn't selling. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was my family story, etched in every scuff on the hardwood floors. Then came the neighborhood meeting. I can still see the community center, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the folding chairs packed with familiar faces. Margaret Hensley, my neighbor of 20 years, stood at the front, her pearls glinting as she spoke. "Eleanor's house is a liability," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "She's too old to maintain it. She's confused, forgetful, maybe not fit to live alone." I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, feeling every eye in the room bore into me. Confused? Forgetful? I wanted to scream. I'd taught history for 30 years, memorized dates and battles, tended my garden with care. But Margaret's words landed like blows, and the murmurs of agreement from others, people I'd shared coffee with, laughed with, cut deeper. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my voice caught in my throat. All I could manage was a weak, "This is my home." Margaret smiled, a thin, pitying smile, and said, "We're just looking out for you, dear." Looking out for me? No. They were looking out for their own interests, for the fat checks Palmetto Properties dangled. As I stumbled out into the humid night, the streetlights casting long shadows on the cobblestones, I felt something shift inside me. Anger, betrayal, and a flicker of defiance. Back home, I sat in my armchair, the ticking of my grandfather clock filling the silence. My fingers traced the worn fabric and my mind churned. How had it come to this? I'd baked pies for these people, swapped stories on their porches. Now they were calling me a burden, a relic. I stared at the stained glass window, its colors dim in the moonlight, and wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. But deep down I knew this house was mine, my history, my heart. And I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. The weight of that neighborhood meeting clung to me like the humid Charleston air, heavy and suffocating. I trudged back to my Victorian home, the cobblestone street uneven under my worn shoes, the scent of river water and magnolias faint in the dusk. My hands still trembled from Margaret's words. Too old, confused, a liability. Each syllable a betrayal from someone I'd once called a friend. Inside, the familiar creak of my front door and the soft glow of my stained glass windows offered no comfort. I sank into my armchair, the fabric frayed under my fingers, and stared at the ticking grandfather clock. Its steady rhythm mocked my racing heart. How could they turn on me like this? My home, my family's legacy, was slipping through my fingers, and I felt powerless to stop it. But something stirred in me that evening, a spark of defiance, faint but stubborn. I couldn't just sit here, drowning in their lies. I needed to clear my head, to feel the earth under my hands. So I grabbed my gardening gloves and trowel, the metal cool against my palm, and headed to the backyard. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, and the old oak tree in the corner stood like a silent sentinel, its gnarled branches swaying in the breeze. The air smelled of damp soil and honeysuckle, and the distant chirping of crickets filled the quiet. I knelt by a patch of roses, digging aimlessly, letting the rhythm of the work steady my nerves. That's when it happened. My trowel hit something hard, a dull clang that jolted me. My breath caught. I scraped away the dirt, my fingers brushing against something cold and rough. A rusted iron chest, half buried under the oak's roots, emerged like a secret the earth had kept for centuries. My heart pounded as I pried it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, glinting in the fading light, were treasures I could scarcely believe. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed, a brass military insignia, etched with faint initials, and a velvet pouch holding a gold locket and a ruby ring, their surfaces tarnished but radiant. I sat back on my heels, the dirt smudging my gloves, and whispered to myself, "What is this?" My mind raced. Could these be from the Civil War, tied to Charleston's history? And why were they here, in my garden? I carried the chest inside, my arms aching under its weight, and set it on my kitchen table. The wood creaked under the load, and the overhead light cast eerie shadows across the artifacts. I opened the journal, its brittle pages crackling, and saw dates from the 1860s, names I didn't recognize, and sketches of battle lines. My history teacher's instincts kicked in, and I felt a flicker of excitement, a lifeline in the darkness. These weren't just objects. They were a piece of the past, maybe even my family's past. Could they be worth something? Enough to save my home? The next morning I wrapped the artifacts in a shawl and drove to Henry's Antiques shop, a cluttered haven on King Street. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, greeted by the musty smell of old books and the faint glow of a desk lamp. Henry, my friend from my teaching days, adjusted his glasses and peered at the chest. "Eleanor, where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low with awe. I told him about the oak tree, the dirt, the discovery. He examined the journal, his fingers tracing the faded ink, and said, "These could be Civil War relics worth millions at auction." Millions. The word hit me like a wave, promising salvation but also danger. If Margaret or Palmetto Properties found out, what would they do? That fear wasn't unfounded. Days later, a crisp white envelope from Palmetto Properties slid under my door, its red-inked words screaming urgency, "Sell now or face legal action." I stood in my hallway, the paper trembling in my hands, and felt the walls closing in. Outside, I caught neighbors whispering, their eyes darting away when I passed. The once warm street, with its flower boxes and rocking chairs, felt like a battlefield. I clutched the journal to my chest, its leather cool against my skin, and wondered if these treasures were my way out or a magnet for more trouble. The rusted chest sat heavy on my kitchen table, its secrets spilling across the worn oak like a lifeline I wasn't sure I deserved. Every night I'd trace the journal's faded ink, the Civil War relics glinting under my lamp, and feel a flicker of hope, a chance to save my Charleston home. But hope is a fragile thing, and as I stood in my hallway, clutching that threatening letter from Palmetto Properties, I felt it waver. The red ink screamed, "Sell now or face legal action." And the words burned into me, sharp as the betrayal of my neighbor's whispers. The air in my Victorian house felt thick, the lavender scent of my grandmother's sachets now cloying, and the creak of the floorboards echoed my unease. I was 65, alone, and the world seemed hell-bent on proving I was too weak to fight. But something in me, call it stubbornness or pride, refused to break. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The next morning I drove downtown, the Charleston skyline unfolding with its church steeples and palmetto trees swaying against a gray sky. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I pulled up to Clara Beaumont's law office. Clara was a name I'd heard in hushed tones, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who'd taken down shady developers before. Her office was a study in elegance, a polished walnut desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Ashley River, and stacks of legal files arranged with military precision. Clara herself was a force, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes piercing as she listened to my story. "Palmetto's playing dirty, Eleanor," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. "They're bullying you with loopholes and lies, but we'll fight them, hard." I sat across from her, my beige sweater feeling frumpy against her crisp blazer, and for the first time in weeks I felt a spark of control. Clara's confidence was contagious, but as I left, her warning lingered. "Watch your back. They won't stop here." Buoyed by Clara's resolve, I took another bold step. I contacted Sotheby's, the auction house, to appraise the relics. Over the phone, their expert's voice crackled with excitement as I described the journal, the insignia, the ruby ring. "Mrs. Grayson, these could fetch millions," he said. "Civil War artifacts of this caliber are rare, especially with provenance tied to Charleston." I stood in my living room, the receiver pressed to my ear, and let the words sink in. Millions. Enough to restore my home, to silence Margaret's venom, to prove I wasn't the frail old woman they painted me as. I hung up and caught my reflection in the stained glass window. Silver hair, tired eyes, but a new fire burning inside. For the first time, I slipped on a navy dress instead of my usual sweater, the fabric smooth against my skin, and felt like I was stepping into a version of myself I'd forgotten. But Charleston's whispers grew darker. Margaret Hensley, with her polished pearls and saccharine smile, wasn't done. I overheard her at the market, her voice carrying over bins of peaches. "Eleanor's so-called treasure? Probably fake. She's desperate, making it all up." The words hit like a slap, and I froze, my basket trembling in my hands. Fake? I wanted to march over, to shove the journal in her face, but I swallowed the rage and walked away, the cobblestones hard under my feet. Worse came when Palmetto sent an inspector to my house, a smug man in a cheap suit who poked at my walls and declared, "This place is a hazard. You're lucky we don't condemn it." His clipboard clattered as he scribbled notes, and I stood in my foyer, the air thick with dust and deceit, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Then one night the real threat emerged. I woke to a faint rustling outside, the kind that sets your nerves on edge. My bedroom window overlooked the backyard, and in the moonlight I saw a shadow moving near the oak tree. My heart thudded as I grabbed my robe, the cotton soft but cold against my skin, and crept to the back door. The crickets had gone silent, replaced by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Someone was out there, near where I'd found the chest. I clutched the doorframe, my breath shallow, and strained to see. A flashlight beam flicked across the garden, then vanished. Whoever it was, they were gone. For now. I sank to the floor, the tiles icy against my knees, and realized Clara was right. Palmetto, Margaret, or someone else. They knew about the treasure and they were coming for it. This story took weeks to craft, pouring our hearts into every detail. If it's got you hooked, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world to us. The shadow in my garden that night haunted me, a reminder that my Civil War treasures were both my salvation and my vulnerability. I kept the rusted chest hidden under a tarp in my attic, its weight pressing on my mind as much as my heart. The air in my Charleston home felt charged, the faint lavender scent now laced with the musty tang of fear. Every creak of the old Victorian's floorboards made me jump. Every rustle outside my window sent my pulse racing. At 65, I'd never felt so alive or so hunted. Palmetto Properties and Margaret Hensley were closing in, their lies and threats tightening like a noose. But I wasn't the frail old woman they thought. I was Eleanor Grayson, and I was ready to fight. Clara Beaumont, my lawyer, became my anchor. Her office, with its walnut desk and riverfront view, was a fortress of strategy. "We've got them, Eleanor," she said, her voice a blade slicing through my doubts. "Palmetto's permits are shaky, forged signatures, bribed inspectors. We'll expose them." Her words lit a fire in me, and I clung to them as I prepared for the next step, the auction. Sotheby's had scheduled a high-profile event in New York, and my relics, the journal, the insignia, the ruby ring, were the centerpiece. I stood in my bedroom, slipping into a teal gown that felt foreign yet empowering, the silk cool against my skin. My silver hair, usually tied back, fell in soft waves. I looked in the mirror and saw not just a retired teacher, but a woman reclaiming her power. The stakes were high, millions of dollars, my home, my legacy, but for the first time, I felt ready. The auction was a world away from Charleston's cobblestone streets. The Manhattan venue dazzled, its chandeliers casting golden light across rows of velvet chairs. The air buzzed with anticipation, scented with expensive perfume and polished leather. I stood backstage, my heart pounding as the auctioneer's gavel struck, his voice booming. Lot 27, a collection of Civil War artifacts from Charleston, starting at $1 million. Bids climbed fast. $2 million, $3 million, then $3.5 million. I gripped Clara's hand, her steady presence grounding me as the room erupted in applause. $3.5 million. The number echoed in my mind, a lifeline to save my home. Reporters swarmed afterward, their cameras flashing, their questions sharp. "Mrs. Grayson, how does it feel to uncover history?" I smiled, my voice steady. "It feels like justice." But inside I was trembling, not just from the victory, but from the weight of what came next. Back in Charleston, the auction made headlines. "Local woman's treasure stuns auction world," the papers read. And suddenly, Palmetto Properties' glossy flyers looked desperate, their promises hollow. I used the money to restore my house. New paint, repaired stained glass windows, a roof that no longer leaked. But my dream went beyond repairs. I turned the ground floor into a small museum, a tribute to Charleston's history. The walls displayed framed pages from the journal, the insignia under glass, and a timeline of my family's roots. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the old wood, and sunlight streamed through the windows, casting rainbows across the exhibits. I was building something permanent, something no one could take away. The final showdown came at another neighborhood meeting, held in the same community center with its buzzing fluorescent lights and creaking chairs. This time I walked in with my head high, Clara at my side, a folder of evidence in my hands. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Margaret stood at the front, her pearls glinting, but her usual smugness faltered when she saw me. I took the podium, my voice clear and unwavering. "Palmetto Properties lied to you," I said, holding up Clara's documents. "Forged permits, illegal threats, they wanted my home, our history, for profit." Gasps rippled through the crowd as I detailed their schemes. Then I turned to Margaret. "You called me confused, a liability," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "I'm asking for a public apology now." Her face flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. I'm sorry," she muttered, the words bitter and forced. The room was silent, but I felt the shift, respect, not pity in their eyes. The museum's opening was a triumph. Hundreds came, their footsteps echoing on my polished floors, their voices warm with admiration. I started teaching free history classes, the laughter of children filling my home for the first time in years. Standing in the exhibit room surrounded by artifacts and sunlight, I felt whole again. The Charleston breeze carried the scent of magnolias through the open windows, and for a moment I could breathe. The museum's opening was still fresh in my mind, the echo of laughter and footsteps lingering like a warm Charleston breeze. My Victorian home, once a battleground, now stood proud, its stained glass windows gleaming, its walls alive with history. At 65, I'd turned the ground floor into a sanctuary for Charleston's past. With the Civil War journal and insignia displayed under soft lights, their stories drawing crowds, the scent of magnolias drifted through the open windows, mingling with the polish of new floors, and for the first time in years, I felt anchored. But as I locked the heavy oak door each night, the memory of that flashlight beam in my garden gnawed at me. Someone had been after my treasures, and even after my triumph, a shadow of doubt clung to my victory. Margaret Hensley's forced apology at the neighborhood meeting hadn't erased her venom. I needed closure, so I invited her to my home, the same porch where she'd once called me a liability. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones, and the air was thick with the hum of cicadas. Margaret arrived, her pearls as polished as ever, but her hands fidgeted, betraying her unease. I stood tall, my navy dress crisp, my silver hair catching the light. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady, "you spread lies about me. You owe this community the truth. Apologize publicly, and I won't press charges for the harassment." Her eyes narrowed, her lips a tight line. "I already said I'm sorry," she snapped, her voice brittle. "What more do you want?" I held her gaze, unflinching. "The truth, or I let Clara Beaumont dig deeper." She shifted, her fingers twisting her necklace, and finally muttered, "Fine, I'll do it." But as she turned to leave, her glance toward my garden felt like a warning. That night, alone in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, the cotton quilt soft under my hands. The journal, now safe in the museum, had been my lifeline, but I couldn't shake the fear that some relics, the ruby ring perhaps, might have been taken that night in the garden. I'd checked the chest after the intrusion, but in the chaos I couldn't be sure. The thought twisted in my gut, a loose thread in my victory. Had Palmetto's goons gotten to it, or was it Margaret, her greed hidden behind her polished facade? I pressed my fingers to my temples, the silence of the house broken only by the distant creak of settling wood. My home was mine again, but at what cost? As days passed, I threw myself into the museum. Teaching history classes brought life back to my mornings, the chatter of students, a melody I'd missed. Standing before the exhibits, I shared stories of Charleston's resilience, my voice carrying a strength I'd rediscovered. The breeze through the windows carried the salty tang of the Ashley River, and sunlight danced across the artifacts, making them glow. I was no longer the confused old woman they'd painted. I was Eleanor Grayson, keeper of history, defender of my home. But the lesson I carried deepest was this. At 65, I learned it's never too late to fight for what's yours. Your home, your history, your worth, they're worth defending, no matter how many stand against you. I stood on my porch one evening, the sunset painting the sky in hues of coral and gold, and felt the weight of that truth. My hair fluttered in the wind, and for a moment, I was at peace. If this story moved you, check out 2 more incredible tales right on your screen. Click now. You won't want to miss them.